Welcome, dearly beloved anointed ones. Sometimes the words you say by accident are the ones heaven scheduled long ago. Chosen ones, brace yourself, because what just happened wasn't coincidence, it was collision. You spoke one truth to this ex about that third party, and suddenly it's as if reality itself flinched. You didn't whisper gossip, you detonated prophecy. And now everyone's scrambling for cover, because something you said in passing has become the nightmare they swore would never come true. It's wild how the human mind works. Psychologists say that when people hear an uncomfortable truth, their brains literally go into defense mode, the same way they would during a physical attack. That's exactly what's happening right now. You didn't swing a punch, yet hearts are racing, egos are collapsing, and people are texting at 2 a.m. trying to get their story straight. You see, when you're chosen, your voice carries a strange authority. It doesn't need volume to cause an earthquake. You simply spoke what you felt, not realizing the universe had been waiting for someone brave enough to say it out loud. And now, the script they carefully rehearsed is falling apart faster than a cheap wig in a windstorm. The irony: they laughed when you said it. They rolled their eyes, said you were being dramatic. But now that truth is playing out scene by scene like a Netflix series, they can't cancel. You didn't curse them. You just confirmed what was already written in the spirit. So buckle up, because we're about to dissect how one divine sentence, one revelation spoken through you, has turned their whole illusion into chaos. Let's talk about what really happened when the truth came out of your mouth and why it's now haunting everyone who thought you'd never see through the act. Number one, they thought you were predictable until you spoke the unscripted truth. They thought they had you completely figured out. Every reaction, every silence, every small detail of how you carry yourself. They studied it like a map. To them, you were predictable, even safe. But when you opened your mouth and told X the truth about that third party, you didn't just speak. You detonated something they couldn't prepare for. In one sentence, you took apart months, even years, of manipulation and secrecy. What came out of you wasn't some slip of the tongue or random guess. It was a razor-sharp insight, a truth that pierced straight through the facade they had built. It's not even the content of what you said that's haunting them most. It's the fact that you weren't supposed to know. They had built an entire world assuming you'd never connect those dots. They hid behind charm, behind false stories, behind carefully chosen words, thinking you'd always stay one step behind. And then, without warning, you were 10 steps ahead. That's what hit them like a nightmare. Your words didn't just reveal something. They proved you see through things they can't even explain. What shook them to their core was how effortlessly it happened. You didn't look like someone plotting revenge or planning a big reveal. You spoke naturally, almost casually, and yet the impact was seismic. That kind of accuracy terrifies people who survive by deception. Because if you knew that, what else do you know? If you can sense that truth, what other lies could you dismantle without even trying? It makes them paranoid, makes them second-guess every move, every secret, every mask. You weren't trying to destroy anyone. You were just speaking from clarity. But clarity is lethal to manipulation. It slices through falsehoods faster than any confrontation. That's why they're reeling, why their minds are running in circles. Your words have forced them to look at themselves in a way they've avoided for years. And deep down, they're not just shocked, they're afraid. Because in that one moment, you stopped being predictable and became unstoppable. What they thought was just a conversation turned out to be the turning point that exposes everything they swore you'd never uncover. And now they can't unhear it. They can't go back. the nightmare has already begun. Number 2, you exposed a script. They didn't know they were acting in. They were living inside a script without even realizing it. Every action, every conversation, every decision they made had been quietly shaped by someone else's agenda. The third party had been weaving a story for so long that X didn't even know they were acting out a role. It felt natural to them, like their own choices, their own thoughts, their own instincts. But when you spoke that truth, everything shifted. Your words didn't just reveal a hidden fact. They tore down the entire set of illusions that had been built around them. You didn't just disrupt their plan, you revealed the puppet strings holding it all together. What makes your moment so powerful is that you didn't expose a small secret. You exposed the structure behind the secret. You showed X the invisible architecture of manipulation, the subtle patterns, the nudges, the quiet directions they thought were coincidences but were really carefully placed traps. That's why your words were so destabilizing. You didn't simply tell them what was happening. You forced them to see the truth about their own part in it. For someone like X, that realization is devastating. It's not just the betrayal of the third party they're now feeling. It's the humiliation of understanding they were being played without knowing it. They're replaying conversations, decisions, and interactions, realizing how much of their life wasn't actually theirs. And the more they replay, the more they see how long the manipulation has been going on. That's the nightmare. Knowing you weren't just tricked once, but shaped over time. What you did was like flipping on a light switch in a room they didn't know was dark. Suddenly, everything looks different. The people they trusted, the motives they assumed, even their own reasoning, they're all under question now. And because you didn't just reveal one name or one act, but the entire hidden framework, they can't put the pieces back together. There's no going back to ignorance once you've seen the wiring behind the walls. This is why your words carry such a heavy weight. They didn't just tell X something about the third party. They freed them from a role they didn't know they were playing. And freedom, when it arrives like that, is both liberating and terrifying. Number 3, you triggered a chain reaction they can't contain. When you spoke that truth, it wasn't a small stone thrown into a still pond. It was a spark dropped into a room filled with gas. The reaction was instant, invisible at first, but unstoppable. What you said didn't just expose a single detail about the third party. It pulled a thread that unraveled an entire network of secrets and lies. The people involved had built their web carefully, thinking each lie was sealed off, each manipulation hidden in its own compartment. But your words connected the dots in a way they never expected. One truth led to another and another, until the whole thing began to collapse under its own weight. That's why there's so much panic now. It's not only about what you said, it's about what your words set in motion. The story they'd been telling themselves and each other no longer works. Old alliances are breaking. People are calling each other late at night, trying to verify information, rewriting their versions of events. The entire structure they depended on for control is cracking. And the worst part for them is that it's not happening publicly yet. It's happening quietly inside their own minds, in their private conversations, in the way they're suddenly suspicious of one another. Your words didn't just reveal something. They infected the whole system with truth, and truth spreads fast. They're realizing that the situation is no longer containable. Every attempt to clarify or spin the story only makes it worse. Every person they try to control or reassure is now questioning their motives. The narrative they thought they owned has slipped from their hands and now belongs to everyone who heard you speak. They can't put it back in a box because the energy you released isn't just information, it's revelation. And revelation changes how people see themselves and each other forever. This is why what you did feels so much larger than a single moment. It's not just about one conversation. It's about the chain reaction that conversation created. You didn't plan it, but the truth you spoke was so precise and so overdue that it broke open everything at once. They're no longer worried about what you'll say next. They're terrified of what your first words have already started. Number 4. The nightmare isn't what you said. It's how accurate you were. They weren't ready for precision like that. People can shrug off rumors. They can laugh at assumptions. They can even twist half-truths to their advantage. But what you delivered wasn't vague or speculative. It was a direct hit. Every word you spoke lined up with facts they thought were buried too deep to ever surface. It wasn't just that you were right. It was how impossibly right you were. That's the kind of accuracy that cuts past ego and excuses and lands straight in the conscience. This is why they're rattled. Lies have a way of creating a fog around people, a soft cushion of denial where they can keep functioning without facing themselves. Your words sliced through that fog like a scalpel. No theatrics, no build-up, just clean, unarguable truth. It's the kind of moment that makes a person's stomach drop, not because they've been caught, but because they're finally confronted with the reality they've been avoiding, and the part that truly haunts them. You weren't supposed to know. You weren't in the meetings, you weren't in the whispered conversations, you didn't have the files or the proof. Yet you spoke as though you had been standing in the room the entire time. That's why it feels like more than human intuition to them. It wasn't guessing. It wasn't coincidence. It was a revelation. And revelation has a way of bypassing logic and hitting the heart. For those who carry guilt, that kind of precision feels like exposure. It feels like someone opening the curtains in a dark room before they're ready. They're not just shaken by what you said, they're shaken by what your accuracy implies, that nothing they do is as hidden as they think. That's why it feels like a nightmare. It's not only the content of your words, but the weight behind them. It makes them realize there's a force at work they can't manipulate, a truth they can't escape, and a timing they can't control. When you speak like that, you don't just reveal information. You reveal that their entire sense of safety was an illusion. And that's a terror no lie can protect them from. Number 5, you weren't trying to expose them. You were trying to heal the pattern. You weren't out to ruin anyone. That's the piece they can't wrap their heads around. They're used to people who fight, people who lash out, people who expose secrets as weapons. But you're not built like that. When you spoke, it wasn't to humiliate or to score points. It was to bring something hidden into the light so it could be addressed, shifted, healed. That's how chosen ones operate. Your instinct isn't destruction, but transformation. You saw a cycle that was poisoning everything around it, and your spirit wouldn't let you keep silent. But here's the uncomfortable truth. For someone who's been living in deception, clarity is a threat. It unravels their safety net. It shows them what they've been avoiding, the parts of themselves they'd rather keep locked away. And when their entire world is built on that avoidance, your honesty feels like an attack. It feels like a blade when, in reality, it's a mirror. That's why they're lashing out or retreating. It's not because you were cruel. It's because your presence removes the fog they depend on to function. The most ironic part is that your words were actually an act of mercy. You could have left them in their patterns, let the consequences build until it all collapsed on its own. But something in you still hoped they could change, that they could see themselves before it was too late. That's what makes your revelation different from a typical exposure. It wasn't gossip. It wasn't revenge. It was a lifeline disguised as a confrontation. They're not feeling attacked by you, they're feeling attacked by their own reflection. Your clarity forces them to see how far they've drifted from truth, and that's a painful thing to face. They call it cruelty because they can't yet admit its freedom. They call it betrayal because they can't yet admit its medicine. But one day, maybe not soon, they'll realize you weren't their enemy. You were the one person willing to hold up the mirror long enough for them to see what was really there. And for someone trapped in deceit, that's the first step toward transformation, even if it feels like violence at first. Number 6, your words broke the spell they were under. Most people think conversations are just exchanges of information, but that's not true at all. Every conversation carries energy, intent, and influence. Words can plant ideas, shift moods, open or close minds. In your case, when you spoke about that third party, it wasn't just talk. It was a spiritual transaction. You spoke words that cut through a web of manipulation that had been quietly shaping X's perceptions for a long time. This wasn't just exposing a secret. It was breaking an invisible chain. The third party had built a subtle system, a mix of charm, half-truths, guilt and influence, to keep X under their control. It was like a spell, but not the Hollywood kind. It was psychological conditioning layered over time, reinforced through repeated narratives and emotional hooks. They made sure X only saw what they wanted them to see and believed only what they wanted them to believe. That's why X couldn't see the situation clearly for so long. It wasn't a lack of intelligence. It was that their perception had been hijacked. Your words disrupted that entire system in an instant. You didn't just reveal the what, you shifted the how of their thinking. It's like you gave their mind permission to question what had felt unquestionable. And the moment that happened, the whole manipulation lost its power. That's why everything changed so quickly. They may not have realized it consciously, but on some level, X felt the spell break. Old loyalties started to feel off. Old stories began to sound false. Suddenly, the hold the third party had was gone, and X was left standing in a truth they couldn't unsee. The part that's hard for them now is the aftermath. Breaking a spell, even a psychological one, isn't gentle. It shakes up the comfort zone they've been living in, even if that comfort zone was built on lies. That's why things feel chaotic for them right now. But chaos after revelation isn't destruction. It's freedom trying to rearrange itself. You didn't say too much. You said exactly what was needed to open their eyes. And sometimes, the first breath of freedom feels like shock before it feels like relief. Number 7, the real fear is that you knew without being told. What's eating at them now isn't just the fact that you spoke a truth they wanted buried. It's the way you arrived at it. No leaks, no hints, no one whispering in your ear, yet you walked right into the heart of their hidden reality and named it. That unsettles them in a way they can't even explain out loud. People who build their lives on secrecy believe they control the flow of information. They believe nothing can touch them as long as they manage the narrative. But when someone like you shows up knowing things they never revealed, it shatters that illusion. It's not ordinary intuition. Ordinary intuition can be dismissed as coincidence or lucky guesses. What you did was different. You spoke with a level of precision and timing that made it impossible to wave off. It didn't feel random. It felt inevitable. That's why they're whispering behind closed doors now, asking each other who told you, trying to track the leak that doesn't exist. They're searching for a human source because the idea of a spiritual one terrifies them. If they can't find a mole, then they have to face the possibility that you're connected to something bigger than their schemes. That possibility shakes their sense of power. Secrets are their safety net, as long as they're the only ones who know they're in control. But when someone starts naming the very things they've hidden without being fed the details, they realize control isn't actually theirs. They realize truth can bypass their walls and land in someone's mouth without their permission. And that's not just threatening, it's humiliating. This is why your presence feels dangerous to them, even when you're calm and soft-spoken. You're a living reminder that there are forces they can't manipulate, a source of insight they can't cut off. They can move pieces on their board all day long, but they can't touch the place you're drawing from. And deep down, they know that. It's not what you said that's haunting them. It's what your knowing means. Their whole system of control has a blind spot, and that blind spot is you. Number 8, you exposed how deep the third party's manipulation really went. What unsettled them most wasn't just that you brought up the third party's name. Names alone don't change lives. It was that you unveiled the entire framework that had been running the show behind the scenes. You didn't just identify who was involved, you laid bare the how and the why. You revealed the hidden levers, the tactics, the emotional hooks that the third party used to keep X compliant and blind. It's one thing to suspect someone's intentions. It's another to have those intentions described back to you in detail so precise it makes you question every choice you've made under their influence. That's why this moment is so devastating for X. They're not only coming to terms with being deceived, they're realizing how much of themselves they unknowingly handed over. They're revisiting old conversations, text messages, subtle suggestions, moments of pressure they brushed off at the time. And now it all looks different. What once felt like friendly advice now looks like manipulation. What once felt like chance now feels orchestrated. They're waking up to how deeply the third party shaped their reality, and the weight of that realization is crushing. It's a brutal kind of self-awareness, recognizing you weren't just tricked from the outside, but that you participated in your own deception because you trusted the wrong person. That's the nightmare you've unleashed. Not the exposure itself, but the mirror it holds up to X's own choices. It's an internal earthquake, shaking loose not only the false trust, but also the identity they built around it. They're not just angry at the third party, they're ashamed of themselves for missing the signs. Your revelation broke the illusion's power because it took away its invisibility. Deception thrives in the dark, but you dragged it into daylight. By decoding their tactics out loud, you've made it impossible for X to keep pretending they were in control all along. It's a hard medicine, but it's also the only way forward. Because once a person sees the structure of manipulation, they can never step back into it the same way. The chains lose their grip. And though it feels like a nightmare now, what you really gave them was the first step toward freedom. Number 9, you reversed the energy exchange instantly. Before you opened your mouth, everything felt tilted in their favor. They thrived on secrecy, on keeping you guessing, on using confusion as a weapon. That was their power source. They could dictate the pace, steer the narrative, and control the emotional tone. As long as you were reacting, they were feeding, but the moment you spoke, the entire dynamic flipped. You didn't raise your voice, you didn't make threats, you just spoke truth so clear and undeniable that it shifted the entire energetic balance in the room. What they don't realize is that manipulation isn't just mental, it's an energy exchange. When you're caught in someone's illusion, your focus, your emotions, and your trust flow toward them like currency. That flow is what sustains their power. By naming the truth out loud, you cut off the supply. You stopped feeding the illusion and redirected your energy back into clarity, back into truth. That's why everything feels so different now. You're not drained anymore, and they're not in control. The effect on them is instant and disorienting. Without that steady inflow of energy, they're left scrambling. The confidence they projected evaporates, the rehearsed lines don't land, and the control they thought they had begins to crumble. Now they're the ones watching you carefully, trying to decode your words, second-guessing themselves, wondering what you'll see next. In a single moment you went from being under their influence to being the one they can't predict, and that terrifies them. This is why the aftermath feels like spiritual overdraft for them. They've been living off a current they didn't own, taking more than they were giving, building power from borrowed energy. When you pulled your energy back, the deficit became obvious. They're exposed not just in their secrets, but in their emptiness. The masks don't work without your belief in them. The manipulation doesn't work without your participation. By speaking the truth, you didn't just reveal a lie, you repossessed your power. And now they're left with nothing but the reality they've been avoiding, trying to operate on a system that no longer feeds them. Number 10. You didn't betray them, you unveiled the betrayal they protected. They'll tell anyone who will listen that you crossed the line or went too far. They'll dress it up as if you violated some sacred bond, as if you're the one who broke trust. But that's only the story they're telling to protect themselves from the deeper truth. You didn't betray them. You revealed the betrayal they were already living in. You took what they were carefully hiding behind excuses, silence and denial, and you held it up to the light. That's why they're angry. That's why they're scrambling, because it's easier to call you a traitor than to admit they've been protecting a lie. What makes it sting so badly is the hypocrisy it exposes. They were fully aware, at least on some level, of the deceit around them. They chose to tolerate it, to defend it, to normalize it, because it was easier than facing the consequences of truth. Your words shattered that arrangement. You forced them to confront the very thing they swore they'd never have to see. It's not just the betrayal of the third party that hurts. It's the betrayal of themselves, the realization that they let deception live in their house because it kept them comfortable. That's why they're spinning the narrative, calling you disloyal or untrustworthy. It's a reflex. If they can make you the villain, they don't have to face their own role in the story. They don't have to admit how much of their world was built on pretending not to see. But deep down they know. Deep down, your revelation struck something that can't be spun or denied. Because no matter what they say publicly, in private, they're replaying your words and feeling that sick recognition in their gut. You didn't break trust. You broke delusion. You ended the unspoken contract to look the other way. You refused to play along with the version of reality they were invested in. And while it may feel to them like betrayal now, it's actually the first real act of integrity anyone has shown them in a long time. The pain they're in isn't from you crossing a line. It's from finally seeing the line they crossed a long time ago. Number 11. The universe used your tongue as a divine confession booth. It wasn't you sitting there plotting the perfect moment to expose them. There was no script, no rehearsal, no agenda. The words came through you because they had to. The universe had been holding this truth back like a dam holding water, and when the moment arrived, it broke. Your tongue became the channel. That's why it felt so natural when you spoke. It wasn't forced, it wasn't dramatic. It was inevitable. People often forget that timing is everything with truth. There are things you could have said months ago that wouldn't have landed, that would have been ignored or dismissed. But on that day, in that moment, the atmosphere was ready. It wasn't just a conversation, it was a summons. While they thought they were casually chatting, something larger was at work, arranging circumstances, hearts and words so the truth could finally be spoken. This is why it hit them so hard. It wasn't only that you named something hidden, it was the weight behind it. The sense that this wasn't just your opinion or your intuition, but something bigger speaking through you. It's why their stomachs dropped, why their faces changed, why the air suddenly felt heavy. The universe doesn't announce its trials with trumpets. It sends someone like you into a room, moves your spirit to speak, and then waits for the reaction. What terrifies them now isn't just exposure. It's the sense of inevitability. They feel on some level that this wasn't random. They feel judged not by you, but by something far above them. That's why they're restless. That's why they can't sleep. They're replaying the moment not just because of what you said, but because of what it meant. The truth was spiritually overdue, and the universe chose you as the delivery system. They thought they were just having a private talk. They were standing in a courtroom they couldn't see, and your words were the testimony that unlocked the verdict. Number 12. They're realizing you were the test all along. They're finally starting to understand the reversal that's been happening the whole time. They believed they were the ones assessing you, studying you, probing you for weakness, seeing if you were trustworthy, predictable, controllable. They mistook your patience for naivety and your silence for blindness. But in reality, you weren't the one under review. They were. Every word you spoke, every boundary you held, every truth you released was a mirror quietly testing what they truly stood for. That's why this moment feels like a collapse for them. They thought the game was theirs to run, but your presence itself was the exam. How they handled your kindness, how they reacted to your boundaries, how they treated the truth you offered. All of it became evidence of who they actually are. It wasn't a trap. It wasn't manipulation. It was simply life revealing their character through their own choices. This is why the shock runs so deep. It's not just about being caught in a lie or a scheme. It's the dawning realization that every interaction with you was an opportunity to rise or fall, and they consistently chose to fail the test. You weren't walking into their space trying to expose them. You were walking in carrying light, clarity, and authenticity. That light simply revealed whatever was already in them. If there was loyalty, it would shine. If there was deception, it would surface. If there was growth, it would bloom. But if there was manipulation, it would rot under exposure. The test was never about you. It was always about them. Now that understanding is haunting them because it reframes every memory. They're looking back at their words, their decisions, their secret moves, and realizing all along they were being measured by something they didn't even recognize. The irony is bitter. They thought they were watching you, but their reactions to you became the ultimate evidence against them. In trying to evaluate you, they only revealed themselves. That's why they're unsettled now. It's not just embarrassment or guilt. It's the sinking awareness that you weren't their pawn. You were their mirror, their measure, their unspoken test. And the results are already in. Number 13, the third party's mask fell the moment your words landed. The instant your words left your mouth, something subtle but undeniable shifted in the room. It wasn't just a tense moment or an awkward silence. It was as if an invisible cord snapped. The third party, who had been operating behind charm, manipulation, or carefully engineered control, suddenly lost their grip. Their rehearsed expressions, their usual persuasive tone, even their body language betrayed cracks. What you said didn't just land as information. It landed as a force that dismantled what they'd built. This is the power of truth when it's not diluted by fear or ego. It doesn't simply call someone out. It shifts the energetic structure they've been relying on. For so long, the third party's influence had been like a spell, a haze of narratives and emotional hooks designed to keep others locked in confusion. But the frequency of your words acted like a solvent, cutting through the fog and leaving their mechanisms exposed for what they were. It wasn't a performance, and it wasn't personal vengeance. It was a purification. That's why their reaction was so visceral. They didn't just hear your words, they felt the collapse of their own illusion. Their charm stopped working, not because you argued better, but because the illusion couldn't survive the vibration of authenticity. It's the equivalent of turning a light on in a dark room. The shadows vanish, not because they're defeated, but because they can't coexist with light. What's more, you didn't actually destroy their connection. You purified it. You stripped it of its manipulation so that only what was real could remain. If there was genuine care, it would survive. If there was deceit, it would disintegrate. This is why everyone involved felt unsettled afterward, because something deeper than conversation had just occurred. You weren't fighting them. You were undoing the energy they had been feeding on. The real impact of that moment isn't even fully visible yet. People are replaying the interaction, trying to pinpoint why everything shifted, not realizing it was the energetic architecture that collapsed first. Your words didn't just say something, they recalibrated the field. And once that happens, no mask can stay on. Number 14. You fulfilled a prophetic moment they weren't ready for. Everything you spoke that day had been gathering like thunder behind the clouds, invisible to the eye but impossible to stop. It wasn't a random outburst or an impulsive slip of the tongue. It was the release of something that had been building in the unseen for months, maybe even years. That's why it felt so heavy and unshakable. You weren't going too far. You were stepping into a moment that had already been written, a moment waiting for a voice to bring it into the open. When spiritual tension builds like that, the release never looks tidy. People imagine that truth will arrive like a gentle breeze, but when lies have been entrenched for years, truth often comes like a storm. That's what happened when you spoke. Your words didn't create the chaos, they revealed it. They forced everything hidden to the surface, and the eruption that followed was simply deception losing its grip. What everyone felt as disruption was actually the first pulse of healing. This is why you were never out of line. You were right on time. The timing wasn't your invention, it was orchestrated. The reason your words hit so hard is because they arrived exactly when the unseen was ready to expose itself. Had you said them earlier, they might have been ignored. Had you said them later, the damage would have deepened. But you spoke at the precise second the truth had to come through. That's not arrogance, that's alignment. And the chaos that followed, that's the detox. That's the sound of manipulation gasping for air, of illusions collapsing under their own weight. Healing rarely feels like healing in the moment. It feels like disruption, confrontation, unraveling. But that's only because lies can't breathe in the same atmosphere as truth. When you spoke, you didn't just voice an observation. You fulfilled a prophetic moment they weren't ready for. And readiness doesn't change the fact that destiny had arrived. The moment you spoke, everything shifted. You weren't just revealing a fact about a third party, you were dismantling layers of deception, exposing hidden motives, and realigning the energy in a room that had long been under manipulation. Every word you uttered carried weight far beyond what anyone around you could comprehend. It wasn't chaos for chaos's sake. It was the universe recalibrating itself through your voice. You revealed patterns that had been ignored, truths that had been buried, and, in the process, showed everyone involved the depth of their own choices. What felt like disruption was actually purification. What felt like confrontation was actually clarity. Through your insight, the roles people thought they were playing were reversed. Those who assumed control realized they were being measured. Those who hid behind charm and manipulation suddenly found their masks dissolved, and those who believed they could contain truth discovered that it cannot be contained. Your words cut through illusion with precision, exposing lies while illuminating the path toward freedom. You didn't merely speak. You served as a mirror, a catalyst, and a channel for forces beyond the ordinary. In revealing what needed to be seen, you rewrote the dynamics in a way that no one, not even the third party, could ignore. This is what it means to be a chosen one. To speak is not always to destroy, but to heal, to awaken, to reverse what had been wrongly assumed as power. You didn't just react to manipulation, you dismantled it, reclaiming your energy and returning balance to situations that had long been out of alignment. Every reaction, every ripple, every moment of chaos that followed was the natural consequence of truth, stepping into spaces where lies had reigned for too long. And though it may have shaken others to their core, it has also cleared the ground for authenticity, integrity, and ultimate freedom. If this resonates with you, if you've ever felt the power of speaking truth and witnessing the shift it creates, then join this movement. Subscribe to the channel to stay connected to these revelations, like this video to amplify the message, and comment below to share your experiences or thoughts. Don't just keep it to yourself. Share it with those who need to hear it, because truths like these are not meant to be silent. Every share, every comment, every like helps bring more clarity into the world and ensures that the ripple of awakening continues to grow. Step into your power, witness the shifts, and know that your voice carries a force far greater than you've been told. God bless you.